Most people think the three words that matter most in a relationship are the obvious ones. And don't get me wrong, those words matter too. But there's a phrase that lands deeper, that stays longer in someone's memory, that she'll replay in her mind on hard days long after the moment it was said has passed. That phrase isn't "I love you," it's "I chose you." Here's why that distinction matters more than people realize. "I love you" describes a feeling, something that happens to a person almost involuntarily in response to connection and chemistry. It's real and it's meaningful, but it can also feel passive, like something that simply occurred rather than something that was decided. "I chose you," on the other hand, implies action. It implies awareness. It says, I looked at my options, I understood what I was choosing, and out of everything and everyone available to me, I picked you deliberately, consciously, on purpose. Think about what that does psychologically. Feelings can fade, shift, or get confused. But a choice, a real conscious choice, feels stable in a way that pure emotion doesn't. When you tell her you love her, she hears something that happened inside you. When you tell her you chose her, she hears something you decided, something you're actively standing behind day after day. That's an entirely different kind of security to receive from another person. This matters even more in a world where so many relationships today feel accidental. Situationships that formed out of convenience, relationships that started because two people happened to be in the same place at the same time, connections that never really involved active decision-making at any point. In that landscape, a woman who hears, "I chose you," isn't just hearing a compliment. She's hearing something rare, proof that she wasn't simply the person who happened to be there. She was the person you actively decided was worth building something with. Here's what makes this phrase even more powerful. It directly answers one of the deepest, often unspoken fears many women carry into relationships. The fear of being settled for. The fear of being convenient rather than wanted. The fear that if someone better, easier, or more exciting came along, they'd be replaced without much resistance. "I chose you" quiets that fear in a way that generic affection never fully can, because it reframes the relationship as an active decision you continue to make, not a passive circumstance you happen to be in. But here's the part that really determines whether this phrase becomes unforgettable or forgettable. It has to be backed by consistency. Saying "I chose you" once in a romantic moment means very little if your actions afterwards suggest otherwise. The phrase becomes powerful only when it's proven repeatedly through the small decisions that follow it, choosing to show up, choosing to stay present, choosing her again on ordinary days when nothing romantic is prompting you to. Because at the end of the day, the words that stay with someone forever aren't just the ones that sound beautiful in the moment. They're the ones that get proven true over and over, long after they were first spoken. And when a woman feels chosen, not once, but consistently, that feeling becomes something she doesn't just remember. It becomes something she builds her sense of security around. There's something that happens quietly, long before a woman ever says she trusts you, long before she opens up about her fears or her past or the parts of herself she usually keeps guarded. Before any of that, she's watching. She's testing, sometimes without even realizing she's doing it, whether being near you feels safe, not exciting, not exhilarating. Safe. Because for most women, safety isn't the opposite of passion, it's the foundation that has to exist before real passion can even take root. So when you tell her, "You're safe with me," and you mean it, and more importantly, when you prove it, that phrase does something most people underestimate. It doesn't just comfort her in the moment. It answers a question she's likely been silently asking since the very beginning, often shaped by past experiences she may never fully explain to you. Can I actually let my guard down here, or will this be like the last time? Here's what's important to understand about safety in relationships. It's not just about physical protection, though that matters too. It's emotional. It's the safety of knowing her words won't be used against her later. The safety of knowing her vulnerability won't be met with judgment or mockery. The safety of knowing that on her worst day, when she's not put together, not impressive, not easy to be around, she still won't be abandoned or made to feel like a burden. That kind of safety is rare, and most people spend years searching for it without ever finding it. This is why the phrase, "You're safe with me," lands so much deeper than typical romantic language. It's not about excitement, it's not about grand gestures. It speaks directly to a woman's nervous system, to the part of her that's constantly, quietly assessing whether this connection is one she can actually relax into or one she has to stay guarded around, just in case. But here's the part that separates this phrase from empty reassurance. Safety isn't something you can simply declare once and expect to be believed. It has to be demonstrated repeatedly through consistency. It's built in the moments when she shares something vulnerable and you respond with patience instead of dismissal. It's built when she makes a mistake and you respond with understanding instead of punishment. It's built in the calm, ordinary moments when nothing is being tested, but trust is quietly accumulating anyway, one small proof at a time. And once that safety is truly established, once she knows, not just hopes, that she can be fully herself around you without fear of judgment or abandonment, something shifts. She stops performing. She stops filtering herself down to the version she thinks is easiest to love. She starts showing up as she actually is, because for the first time, maybe in a long time, she doesn't have to brace herself for the worst. This is why you're safe with me, when it's real, becomes one of the most unforgettable things a woman can hear. Not because of how it sounds, but because of what it gives her permission to do, to finally stop protecting herself from the person she's supposed to be building a life with. Because in the end, people don't fall in love with excitement alone. They fall in love with the place where they finally feel safe enough to stop pretending. And once someone finds that with you, it's not something they forget. It's something they hold on to. There's a difference between being loved and being seen, and most people don't realize how much they crave the second one until someone actually gives it to them. Because being loved can sometimes feel automatic, almost obligatory, like something that comes with the role. Of course, your partner loves you. That's the arrangement. But being witnessed, being genuinely noticed for who you are and what you've accomplished, independent of your role as a girlfriend or partner, that's something else entirely. That's what "I'm proud of you" actually offers, and it's rarer than people think. Here's what makes this phrase so different from typical romantic affirmations. "I love you" speaks to the relationship. "I'm proud of you" speaks to her as an individual, completely separate from what she means to you. It says, "I'm not just paying attention to how you make me feel. I'm paying attention to who you're becoming, what you're building, what you're overcoming, even when none of it directly involves me." That distinction matters more than most people realize, because it tells her that she's valued not just as a partner, but as a person with her own goals, her own struggles, her own growth happening entirely outside the relationship. Think about how rare that kind of attention actually is. Many people go through life being appreciated only for what they provide to others, being a good partner, a good employee, a good friend, without ever being acknowledged simply for who they are and what they're working toward on their own. So when someone takes the time to notice her effort, her progress, her small and big wins, and says out loud, "I'm proud of you," it lands somewhere deeper than most compliments ever reach. It tells her that her personal growth matters to you, not because it benefits you, but because it matters to her. This is especially powerful for women who've spent years being defined primarily through their relationships. As someone's girlfriend, someone's wife, someone's support system, without much space left over to be celebrated as their own person. When you notice her individual achievements, her resilience, the effort she puts into things that have nothing to do with you, and you say it plainly, without being asked, you're giving her something many relationships never offer, the experience of being fully seen, not just loved. Here's what makes this phrase stick long after it's said. Compliments about appearance fade quickly because they're surface level and, frankly, replaceable. Anyone can comment on how she looks. But being told specifically and sincerely that you're proud of something she worked hard for, something that took real effort or courage, speaks to a much deeper part of her identity. It tells her that you're not just attracted to her, you respect her. And respect, once earned and expressed, tends to outlast almost every other form of affection. "This is why I'm proud of you," said sincerely, at the right moment becomes something she carries with her. Not because it was romantic, but because it was validating in a way that so few people take the time to offer. It tells her that her efforts don't go unnoticed, that her growth matters to someone, that she's not invisible in her own story, because in the end, everyone wants to be loved. But far fewer people ever truly feel witnessed. And once someone gives a woman that experience, of being seen, acknowledged, and celebrated for exactly who she is. It becomes one of the most unforgettable gifts she's ever received. There's a kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from arguments or big dramatic problems. It comes from uncertainty, from not knowing where you stand, from wondering if the person you're with is going to be there next month, next year, or whether this is just another connection that quietly fades once things get complicated. In a dating culture full of situationships, mixed signals, and half commitments, uncertainty has almost become the default. So when someone looks a woman in the eyes and says, plainly, "I'm not going anywhere," that sentence lands differently than it would have a generation ago. It lands like relief. Here's why this phrase carries so much weight. Most people today have been trained, often through painful experience, to expect impermanence. They've been left without explanation. They've been slowly faded out of someone's life instead of given a clear ending. They've learned to brace themselves, to stay a little guarded, to hold part of themselves back, just in case the person in front of them turns out to be temporary too. Against that backdrop, certainty isn't just comforting, it's almost radical. It goes against everything modern dating has quietly taught people to expect. When you tell her, "I'm not going anywhere," you're not just offering reassurance in a single moment. You're directly countering a pattern she may have experienced over and over: the slow fade, the sudden disappearance, the emotional inconsistency that leaves people constantly questioning where they stand. That phrase interrupts that pattern. It gives her permission to stop bracing for an ending that this time isn't coming. But here's what makes this phrase either powerful or hollow. Everything depends on whether it's backed by consistency. Words about permanence mean very little if they're followed by inconsistency, mixed signals, or behavior that contradicts them. Saying, "I'm not going anywhere" during a good moment and then disappearing during a hard one does more damage than saying nothing at all, because it teaches her that even reassurance from you can't be trusted. The phrase only becomes meaningful when it's proven, again and again, through actual presence, especially during the moments when leaving would have been easier than staying. This is why real reassurance isn't really about the words themselves. It's about what those words represent over time. Every time you stay consistent during conflict instead of withdrawing, every time you show up during a hard season instead of creating distance, every time your actions confirm what you said in that one sincere moment, you're building proof behind a promise. And once that proof accumulates, "I'm not going anywhere," stops being just a sentence. It becomes something she can actually rely on, something that quietly rewires the expectations she walked into the relationship with. Here's what's easy to underestimate about this. Certainty doesn't just feel good in the moment. It changes how someone shows up in a relationship altogether. When a woman isn't spending energy wondering whether you'll still be there next week, she has more room to actually be present, to invest fully, to stop protecting herself from an exit that isn't coming. Uncertainty keeps people guarded. Certainty invites them to finally let go of that guard. So while so many relationships today are built on ambiguity, on undefined situations, on people afraid to commit to anything resembling permanence, the ones who offer real, proven certainty stand out in a way that's impossible to forget. Because in a world where almost everyone eventually leaves without explanation, the person who stays, who actually means it when they say they're not going anywhere, becomes someone she doesn't just appreciate. She becomes someone she finally lets herself believe in. Everyone falls for the version of a person that's easiest to fall for. The confident laugh, the put-together presence, the version of someone that shows up polished, composed, and appealing on a first date, a night out, or the early weeks of getting to know each other. That version isn't fake. Exactly. It's just curated, the way most people naturally present themselves before real trust has been built. But underneath that version is another one. The one with insecurities she doesn't advertise. The one with old wounds that occasionally surface at inconvenient times. The one who isn't always graceful, isn't always confident, isn't always the highlight reel version of herself. And almost no one ever earns the right to see that version, let alone love it. So when you tell her sincerely, "I see the real you," and she can feel that you mean the entire picture, not just the parts that are easy to admire, that phrase reaches somewhere most compliments never touch. Because by that point, she already knows you've likely seen her at less than her best. Maybe during an argument where she said something she regretted. Maybe during a moment of insecurity she usually hides well. Maybe during a low point that had nothing to do with you, but that you witnessed anyway. And instead of pulling away, instead of quietly recalibrating your opinion of her, you stayed. And you're telling her that what you saw didn't change how you feel. It deepened it. Here's why this matters so much psychologically. Most people spend enormous energy managing how they're perceived, especially early in relationships, because there's an underlying fear that the real version, the messy, complicated, imperfect version, might be too much, might not be enough, might not be loved the way the curated version was. That fear doesn't disappear just because a relationship starts. If anything, it often grows louder as intimacy increases because the stakes of being truly known start to feel higher, not lower. This is why being told, "I see the real you," and feeling it backed by genuine acceptance rather than quiet tolerance becomes such a defining moment in a relationship. It's not about grand romantic gestures. It's about someone proving that the version of her she's most afraid to reveal is not only accepted, but actually wanted. That distinction between being tolerated and being wanted, flaws included, is one most people search for their entire lives without fully finding. Here's what makes this phrase powerful rather than performative. It has to be demonstrated before it's spoken, or at least alongside it. Anyone can claim to see and accept someone fully. But the phrase only becomes real when it's proven through response, when her imperfect moments are met with patience instead of judgment, when her insecurities are met with reassurance instead of ridicule, when her real self, unfiltered, still gets treated with the same warmth as the polished version she leads with. Once that happens, once she genuinely believes that you've seen the parts of her most people never get access to, and you stayed anyway, something shifts permanently in how she experiences the relationship. She stops performing. She stops managing your perception of her. She starts existing fully without the exhausting effort of constant self-editing. Because being loved for a carefully presented version of yourself is common. Being loved for the real, complicated, unfiltered version, the one hidden beneath the highlight reel, is not. And once a woman experiences that kind of acceptance, it doesn't just make her feel good in the moment, it becomes the reason she finally feels safe enough to stop hiding at all. There's a kind of tiredness that comes from constantly having to ask for basic things. Attention, presence, effort from someone who's supposed to willingly give them. It's exhausting in a way that's hard to explain to people who haven't experienced it, because from the outside, it doesn't look like abuse or obvious mistreatment. It just looks like quietly being second priority over and over until asking for attention starts to feel less like a request and more like begging for something that should have been offered freely in the first place. So when someone tells a woman, plainly and sincerely, "You never have to beg for my attention," that sentence doesn't just sound nice. For many women, it directly undoes a wound they've been carrying, sometimes for years. Here's why this phrase reaches so deep. A significant number of women enter relationships already carrying the residue of past experiences where they had to fight to be prioritized, chasing responses, initiating every plan, wondering why effort always seemed to flow one direction. Over time, that experience doesn't just create frustration. It creates a quiet belief that maybe this is simply what relationships are. One person always giving more, always asking, always making themselves smaller just to receive basic consistency. When you directly name that pattern and promise something different, you're not just making a romantic statement. You're offering healing for something that was broken long before you arrived. Think about what it actually means to never have to beg for attention. It means not having to double text and wonder if you're being annoying. It means not having to plan elaborate ways to get noticed. It means not lying awake wondering why effort feels so lopsided. It means simply existing in a relationship and still receiving warmth, attention, and presence without having to perform or demand it first. That kind of ease sounds simple, but for many people, it's something they've never actually experienced. But here's what separates this phrase from a hollow promise. Like every other phrase we've talked about, it means nothing without consistent action behind it. Telling her she'll never have to beg for attention and then becoming distant, inconsistent, or hard to reach the moment the relationship settles into routine doesn't just break a promise. It reopens the exact wound the words were meant to heal, often making the pain worse than if the promise had never been made at all. This phrase only becomes meaningful when it's proven daily through small, consistent effort that doesn't require her to ask for it first. Here's what makes this so powerful when it is followed through. It fundamentally changes how she experiences the relationship. Instead of monitoring, testing, or silently keeping score of who's putting in more effort, she can actually relax. She can trust that attention and presence will show up on their own without her having to manufacture reasons to receive them. That shift from anxious monitoring to genuine security is one of the most healing experiences a relationship can offer. This is why, among everything we've discussed, this phrase often becomes one of the most unforgettable. Not because it's poetic, but because it directly repairs something that was broken. It tells her that the exhausting pattern she may have accepted as normal isn't something she has to live with here, that she's allowed to simply receive without having to earn basic consideration through constant effort, because in the end, the deepest healing doesn't come from grand romantic gestures. It comes from someone quietly proving, day after day, that the version of love she's always deserved, one that doesn't require begging, was possible all along.